The knock on the door came like a warning bell, hard and sudden, and Alara Whitmore's hands went cold before she even opened it. Two men stood outside her family's small house, their coats dark and their faces darker still. They did not step inside. They did not need to. The taller one simply held up a folded paper with a wax seal that made her stomach drop. "Your father owes a great sum to the Duke of Ravenwood," the man said. "Payment was due 3 days ago. We are not here to collect kindness. We are here to collect gold, or something equal to it." Alara's younger brother, Tomas, peeked out from behind the kitchen curtain, his eyes wide with fear. Her father, Edmund Whitmore, was too ill to rise from his bed, his body worn thin by weeks of worry that had turned into fever. It had been Alara who answered every knock for the past month. It had been Alara who faced every threat alone. "My father is unwell," she said, keeping her voice steady, even as her knees trembled. "He cannot travel. He cannot even stand." "Then someone else will go in his place," the man said. "The Duke does not forgive silence. He wants an answer, and he wants it delivered to his own door, not sent through a servant boy or a runner. If no one comes within the week, the house will be seized, and your family will have nowhere to sleep." The door closed. The threat remained, hanging in the air like smoke that would not clear. That night, Alara sat by her father's bed, listening to his ragged breathing, watching the candle burn lower and lower. She thought of the years he had spent building his small trading business, the years before bad decisions and worse luck had pulled him under. She did not blame him, not truly, though frustration flickered somewhere beneath her fear. Blame would not save them now. Only action would. "I will go," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. Her father's eyes fluttered open, cloudy with fever, but sharp enough to understand. "No," he whispered, "not you, not to him. They say the Duke has no mercy in his heart. He is a man made of ice." "Then I will be the one who does not shiver," Alara answered, though her own voice betrayed a tremor she could not fully hide. By morning, her decision was made. She dressed in her plainest clothes, the ones without patches, though even those had begun to fray at the sleeves. She tied her hair back simply, wanting no attention drawn to her, wanting only to appear as what she was, a daughter trying to save her family. The journey to Ravenwood Manor took most of the day. The roads grew wider and smoother the closer she came, until at last the manor itself rose before her, vast and gray against a sky that had turned the color of slate. It was the kind of house that seemed built to remind visitors of their own smallness. Alara stood at the gates for a long moment, gathering the last of her courage, before she stepped forward and knocked. A servant let her in without much word, leading her through hallways lined with portraits of stern ancestors, and floors so polished she could see her own frightened reflection staring back. She was brought to a large study, its shelves filled with books that looked as though they had never been opened for pleasure, only for duty. The Duke was already there, standing near the window with his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. When he turned, Alara felt her breath catch, not because he was cruel to look at, but because his eyes held no warmth at all, only a cool and steady assessment, as if he were measuring her worth in numbers rather than words. "You are not Edmund Whitmore," he said. It was not a question. "No, my lord. I am his daughter. My father is too ill to travel. I have come in his place, to ask for more time." The Duke studied her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the urge to look away, though she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Time," he repeated, as though the word itself displeased him. "Your father has already had a year's worth of time. He has had excuses, delays, and broken promises. Now, you stand here asking for more, as though patience is a gift I owe your family, simply because you have asked for it." "He did not intend to fail," Alara said, her voice firmer now, anger beginning to burn beneath her fear. "He built something honest, and misfortune took it from him. He is not a man who deserves to lose everything, while lying too weak to even sit upright." "And yet the debt remains, regardless of intention," the Duke said. "I did not ask for his story. I asked for payment." Alara's hands curled into fists at her sides, though she kept them hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Then take it from me instead. I will work. I will do anything within honesty to repay what is owed, but do not take our home while my father cannot even stand to defend it." For the first time, something shifted in the Duke's expression. Not softness, not quite, but a flicker of interest, as though he had expected tears and instead found steel. "You would offer yourself in his place," he said slowly, turning the idea over as one might turn a coin to check its authenticity. Bold, for someone with nothing to bargain with. "I have my word," Elara said, "and I have never broken it." The Duke moved toward his desk, each step unhurried, deliberate, the kind of movement that belonged to a man accustomed to being obeyed without needing to raise his voice. He sat, folding his hands atop a ledger thick with numbers that likely represented her family's entire future. "Your father's debt is not small," he said. "It would take years of ordinary labor to repay, if it could be repaid at all through such means. I have heard every excuse imaginable, from men far more experienced than you, at pleading for mercy. Tell me why I should grant it to a girl who arrived on foot, in a dress meant for washing floors, rather than facing dukes." The insult, subtle as it was, struck harder than she expected, though Elara refused to let it show. "Because unlike the men who came before me, I am not asking you to forget the debt. I am asking for a chance to prove it can still be honored, in time, without destroying what little my family has left." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. The Duke studied her as though she were a puzzle he had not expected to encounter that day, something unfamiliar enough to hold his attention past the point of simple business. "There may be another arrangement," he said at last, his voice quieter now, though no less commanding. "One that would erase the debt entirely, without a single coin changing hands." Elara's heart lifted with sudden cautious hope. "Anything within reason, my lord." "Marry me," the Duke said. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through her thoughts until she could hardly make sense of them. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, that the tension of the day had twisted his meaning into something absurd. "My lord," she managed. "I require a wife," he said, as plainly as if he were discussing the weather. "Not for affection, and not for romance, but for practicality. My title demands an heir eventually, and my household requires order that only a wife's presence can properly provide. Marry me, and your father's debt is erased entirely. Your family keeps their home. Your brother keeps his education. Refuse, and I will pursue the debt through every lawful means available to me, beginning with the seizure of your family's property within the month." Elara stared at him, searching his face for some sign of cruelty hidden beneath the offer, some trap waiting to spring the moment she agreed. But his expression remained unreadable, calm in the way that unsettled her more than anger would have. "You do not know me," she said finally. "You do not even know my name beyond what was written on that debt paper." "I know enough," the Duke replied. "I know you walked here alone, rather than sending a letter. I know you argued with me, rather than weeping for pity. I know you offered yourself, before you offered excuses. That tells me more than any introduction could." Elara's mind raced, weighing the impossible choice before her. Marriage to a stranger, a man whose reputation suggested coldness bordering on cruelty, against the certain collapse of everything her family had left. She thought of her father's fevered breathing, of Tomas's frightened eyes peeking around the curtain, of the home that had sheltered them through every hardship until now. "I need to speak with my father," she said. "I cannot answer for him, or for myself, without at least telling him what has been offered." "You have 3 days," the Duke said, rising from his desk as though the conversation had reached its natural end. "After that, my patience, like your father's excuses, will run out." Elara left the manor with her thoughts in complete disarray, the weight of an impossible decision settling over her like a heavy coat she had not asked to wear. The journey home felt longer than the journey there, every mile giving her more time to imagine the life that awaited her should she agree, and more time to imagine the life that awaited her family should she refuse. When she arrived, her father was sitting up slightly, color returning faintly to his cheeks, though his eyes still carried the exhaustion of illness. Tomas hovered nearby, clutching a cup of water he had been trying to convince their father to drink. "What did he say?" Edmund asked immediately, his voice hoarse but urgent. Elara hesitated, choosing her words carefully, though there was no gentle way to deliver news so strange. "He offered a way to erase the debt entirely," she said. "But the price is marriage, to him." Her father's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked almost like grief. "No," he said, shaking his head weakly. I will not allow it. I would rather lose the house than sell my daughter into a marriage with a man known for having no warmth in his heart. You are not selling me, Alara said gently, kneeling beside his bed. I am choosing this, if I choose it at all, and it may not be as terrible as the rumors suggest. He did not strike me as cruel, only guarded, careful, as though something in his past taught him not to trust easily. And what of your own happiness? Her father asked, his voice breaking. You deserve love, Alara. Not a contract disguised as a marriage. Alara took his hand, feeling how thin it had become during his illness, how fragile the man who had once seemed unshakable to her now felt beneath her fingers. I deserve a family that is safe, she said, and a brother who can finish his studies without fear of losing his home. If this is the price for that safety, then it is a price I am willing to pay. Tomas, quiet until now, finally spoke, his young voice trembling. Will you be happy there, in that big cold house? Alara looked at her brother, forcing a small, reassuring smile onto her face, despite the storm raging within her. I will make my own happiness, she said, wherever I find myself. That night, after her father had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep and Tomas had been coaxed into his own bed, Alara sat alone by the dying fire, turning the decision over again and again in her mind. She thought of the Duke's cold eyes, softened only briefly by something she could not quite name. She thought of the ledger on his desk, thick with numbers that represented her family's entire future. She thought of the word marriage, spoken so plainly, as though it were simply another line item to be settled. By the time dawn broke, her decision was made, though it brought her no comfort, only a quiet, steady resolve. She would return to Ravenwood Manor. She would give her answer, and whatever waited for her behind those cold stone walls, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else in her life since misfortune first arrived at her family's door, without flinching, and without regret for choosing her family's survival over her own uncertain future. As she packed the small bag she would carry with her, she allowed herself one final, private thought, one she did not dare speak aloud even to herself in full honesty. Somewhere beneath the Duke's icy composure, she had seen something that intrigued her, something that made her wonder if perhaps this marriage, born from debt and desperation, might one day become something else entirely. But that thought she buried quickly, unwilling to hope for what seemed impossible, unwilling to soften a heart that would need every ounce of its strength for what was still to come. The road ahead was uncertain, the manor waiting for her answer, and Alara Whitmore walked toward it with her chin lifted high, refusing to let fear or doubt slow her steps, even as her heart pounded with everything she could not yet name. The carriage that arrived at the Whitmore house 3 days later was plain, unmarked by any crest. Though Alara knew exactly who had sent it, she climbed inside with her small bag clutched against her chest, her father's tearful blessing still ringing in her ears, and Tomas's tight embrace still warm on her skin. She did not look back as the horses pulled away, afraid that if she did, her resolve might crumble before it had even been tested. The ride to Ravenwood Manor felt different this time, not because the road had changed, but because she had. She was no longer a desperate girl begging for mercy. She was a woman walking toward a decision she had made with clear eyes, even if her heart still trembled at the uncertainty ahead. When the carriage stopped, a servant helped her down, and she found herself once again standing before the towering gray stones of the manor, though this time she was led not to the study, but to a smaller sitting room, where the Duke waited alone. He rose when she entered, a small courtesy she had not expected, though his expression remained as unreadable as before. You have come to give your answer, he said. I have, Alara replied, straightening her shoulders. I accept your offer. I will marry you, on the condition that my father's debt is erased in writing, before any ceremony takes place, and that my family is never asked to answer for it again. Agreed, the Duke said without hesitation, as though he had expected nothing less. I will have the papers drawn immediately. You may read them yourself before signing, to ensure every word satisfies you. Alara blinked, surprised by the ease of his agreement. She had expected negotiation, perhaps even resistance, but instead, he simply moved to his desk and began writing, his pen moving with the same calm efficiency she remembered from their first meeting. You do not seem surprised that I accepted, she said, watching him carefully. I expected it. the Duke replied without looking up. You are not a woman who abandons those she loves to protect her own comfort. That much was clear from the moment you walked into my study 3 days ago. And what of you? Alara asked, emboldened by his honesty. Why marry a stranger with nothing to offer but a cancelled debt and an uncertain temperament? Surely a man of your position could find a wife among society's finest, women with fortunes and connections far greater than mine. The Duke's pen paused briefly before continuing its steady motion. Society's finest women want titles, not husbands, he said. They want carriages and jewels, and the envy of their friends. I have grown tired of being valued for what I own, rather than who I am. You asked nothing of me, beyond mercy for your family. That is rarer than you might imagine. Alara considered his words, sensing truth beneath them, though also sensing something guarded, something he had not fully explained. She did not press further, choosing instead to focus on the papers he now handed her, the ink still fresh upon them. She read every line carefully, her eyes catching each clause, each condition, until she reached the section confirming her father's debt would be entirely forgiven upon her signature. Relief flooded through her, so overwhelming that her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Once you sign, the Duke said, watching her closely, there is no undoing this arrangement. I want you to be certain before you commit your name to paper. I am certain, Alara said, and signed without further hesitation. The Duke took the paper back, studying her signature for a long moment before setting it aside. Then it is done, he said. The wedding will take place within the fortnight. I see no reason to delay what has already been decided. 2 weeks, Alara repeated, the timeline settling over her with sudden weight. That is very soon. There is little purpose in waiting, the Duke said. Waiting only invites gossip and speculation. Better to settle the matter quickly and allow society to grow accustomed to the arrangement, rather than feed on rumors during a long engagement. Alara nodded, though her mind raced with everything that would need to happen in such a short time. She thought of her father, still recovering from his illness, and wondered if he would be strong enough to attend, or if she would stand at the altar without a single member of her family present. As though sensing her thoughts, the Duke spoke again, his voice slightly softer than before. Your father and brother are welcome to attend the ceremony, should your father's health allow it. I will send a carriage for them, along with a physician to ensure the journey does not worsen his condition. The unexpected kindness caught Alara off guard, and for a moment she studied him with new curiosity, searching for the coldness the rumors had promised, but finding instead a man who, despite his guarded manner, seemed to notice details others might have overlooked. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you may realize. The Duke inclined his head slightly, accepting her gratitude without comment, before turning to matters of practicality once more. You will need appropriate clothing for the ceremony, and for your new position afterward. I will arrange for a seamstress to visit you within the next few days. I do not wish to be draped in extravagance I have not earned, Alara said, a note of stubborn pride creeping into her voice. You are not being draped in anything you have not earned, the Duke replied, his tone firm. As my wife, you will represent this household. Appearing as though you cannot afford proper clothing would reflect poorly, not on you, but on the arrangement itself. Consider it a practical necessity, not an indulgence. Alara conceded the point, recognizing the logic even as pride urged her to resist it. Over the following days, she found herself swept into preparations she had never imagined for herself, fittings for gowns finer than anything she had ever worn, discussions of household duties she would soon be expected to manage, and quiet moments spent wondering about the man she was about to marry. She learned, through careful observation and occasional conversation with the manor's staff, that the Duke was not universally feared, as the rumors suggested. The servants spoke of him with a strange mixture of respect and quiet sympathy, as though they understood something about him that outsiders did not. One elderly housekeeper, a woman named Margaret who had served the family for decades, mentioned in passing that the Duke had not always been so guarded, that something had changed him years ago, though she refused to elaborate further, only shaking her head and changing the subject whenever Alara asked. The mystery intrigued Alara more than she cared to admit, and she found herself watching the Duke more closely during their brief interactions, searching for clues to whatever had transformed him into the cold, calculating figure society whispered about. She noticed the way his eyes sometimes lingered on old portraits in the hallway, particularly one of a young woman with dark curls and a gentle smile, before he would quickly look away, his expression shuddering closed once more. She did not ask about the portrait, sensing instinctively that the answer, whatever it was, belonged to a wound not yet ready to be reopened by a stranger's curiosity. As the wedding day approached, Elara received word that her father's health had improved enough for him to make the journey, and relief washed over her at the news. Tomas sent a letter as well, filled with nervous excitement about seeing the grand manor for himself, along with several questions about whether dukes truly lived as luxuriously as the stories suggested. Elara smiled reading his letter, grateful for the small moment of normalcy, amid everything that had changed so quickly. She wrote back with reassurances, though she could not fully explain, even to herself, what she truly felt about the marriage awaiting her. Fear remained, certainly, along with uncertainty about the future, and the strange man she would soon call her husband. But beneath those feelings, something else had begun to take root, something she was not yet ready to name. Curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest stirring of hope that this arrangement, born from desperation and practicality, might yet become something more meaningful than either she or the Duke had initially intended. The night before her wedding, Elara stood in the small guest chamber she had been given within the manor, staring at her reflection in a mirror, finer than any she had owned before. She thought of her mother, gone many years now, and wondered what she would say if she could see her daughter preparing to marry a stranger for the sake of family survival. "You would understand," Elara whispered to the empty room, though whether she spoke to her mother's memory, or simply to herself, she could not say for certain. "You always told me that love takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest love is sacrifice." With that thought settling over her like a fragile comfort, Elara finally allowed herself to sleep, unaware of how completely her life was about to change, and unaware of the man across the manor, who lay equally sleepless, staring at his own ceiling, wondering if he had finally found something worth risking his carefully guarded heart to protect. Morning arrived faster than Elara expected, bringing with it a flurry of activity, as servants helped her dress, arranged her hair, and prepared her for a ceremony that would bind her future to a man she barely knew. Her father, weakened but present, wept quietly when he saw her, pride and sorrow mingling in his expression, as he took her arm to walk her toward whatever waited ahead. Elara took a steadying breath, squared her shoulders the way she had learned to do during every hardship life had thrown at her, and stepped forward into a future she could not yet predict, but had chosen with open eyes and a determined heart. The small chapel within the manor grounds had been decorated simply, with white flowers lining the aisle, and candles flickering despite the daylight streaming through tall windows. Elara walked toward the altar on her father's trembling arm, aware of every eye in the room, though the gathering was small, limited to household staff, a few distant relatives of the Duke, and her own family. The Duke waited at the altar, dressed in dark, formal attire that made him appear even more imposing than usual, his expression composed into the same unreadable mask she had come to expect. Yet as she drew closer, she thought she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something that might have been nervousness, though she dismissed the thought as impossible for a man so thoroughly controlled. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of formal words and solemn vows, Elara repeating phrases that felt both foreign and strangely significant, binding her life to a stranger's in front of witnesses who barely knew either of them. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke took her hand briefly, his touch brief and formal, before releasing it just as quickly. There was no celebration afterward, no grand feast or dancing as she might have imagined for other weddings. Instead, a modest luncheon was served in the manor's dining hall, conversation stilted and polite, everyone present aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought this marriage into existence. Elara's father pulled her aside briefly during the gathering, his eyes still damp with emotion. "You look beautiful," he said, "though I wish circumstances had been different. I wish you had married for love, not for numbers on a ledger." "Perhaps circumstances are not always what determine happiness," Elara replied, though she was not entirely certain she believed her own words. "I chose this. No one forced me, and I intend to make the best of what I have chosen." Her father nodded, though sadness remained in his expression as he embraced her tightly, whispering blessings and apologies in equal measure before he and Tomas were escorted to guest quarters for the night, their journey home planned for the following morning. As evening fell, and the small gathering dispersed, Alara found herself alone in what was now her new chamber. A room far grander than anything she had known before, filled with fine furniture and soft candlelight. She sat by the window, staring out at the darkening gardens, wondering what her new life would truly hold. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find the Duke standing in the doorway, still dressed in his formal attire, though he had removed his outer coat, leaving him in simpler shirt sleeves that somehow made him appear less like a duke and more like an ordinary man. "May I enter?" he asked, his voice carrying none of the coldness she remembered from their first meeting, though it remained formal, careful. "Of course," Alara said, rising slightly, before settling back into her seat by the window. The Duke entered, but kept a respectful distance, choosing to stand near the fireplace rather than approach her directly. "I wanted to ensure you understood the terms of our arrangement clearly," he said, beyond what was written on paper. Alara raised an eyebrow, curious, despite the formality of his tone. "What terms remain unspoken?" "I do not expect anything from you beyond civility and partnership in managing this household," the Duke said. "This marriage was born from necessity, not affection, and I will not pretend otherwise by demanding intimacy you have not chosen freely. Your chamber is your own. I will not intrude upon it unless you invite me to do so." Alara studied him carefully, surprised by the unexpected consideration behind his words, even as something within her felt a strange disappointment she could not quite explain. "That is generous of you," she said finally, "though I admit I did not expect such consideration from a man the rumors paint as entirely without warmth." Something flickered across the Duke's expression, quickly hidden, though not quickly enough to escape her notice entirely. "Rumors rarely capture the full truth of anyone," he said. "I have learned that lesson well enough to know not to trust them blindly." "Then perhaps I should learn the same lesson," Alara replied, "rather than assuming I already understand the man I have married." The Duke's lips curved slightly, the faintest suggestion of a smile that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "Perhaps," he agreed, "though understanding takes time, and I imagine we have little practice extending patience to strangers." "We are no longer strangers," Alara said softly. "We are husband and wife, regardless of the reasons that brought us here." The Duke nodded slowly, something contemplative in his gaze, as he studied her across the dimly lit room. "No," he agreed. "I suppose we are not strangers any longer. Though I confess, I hardly know how to proceed from here, having never expected to marry at all." "Never?" Alara asked, curiosity overtaking caution. "Surely a man of your position faced expectations to marry long before circumstances brought you to my family's debt." The Duke's expression shuddered closed once more, the brief warmth she had glimpsed retreating behind familiar walls. "There are reasons I avoided marriage for many years," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Reasons I am not prepared to discuss this evening, or perhaps ever." Alara recognized the boundary he had drawn, and chose not to push further, sensing that trust between them would need to be built slowly, through patience rather than force. "Then we shall leave that conversation for another time," she said. "There is no need to resolve every mystery on our wedding night." The Duke seemed almost relieved by her willingness to let the matter rest, and for a moment, the tension between them eased into something almost comfortable. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding what I could not yet explain." "We are partners now," Alara said. "I imagine understanding will become easier with time, as we learn more about each other beyond the circumstances that brought us together." The Duke inclined his head in agreement before moving toward the door, pausing briefly before he departed. "Good night, Alara," he said, using her given name for the first time since they had met, the sound of it in his voice carrying an unexpected warmth that lingered in her thoughts long after he had gone. "Good night, Alistair," she replied, testing his own name upon her tongue for the first time as well, finding it stranger and yet somehow more intimate than she had expected. Alone once more, Alara sat by the window long into the night, watching the moon rise over gardens she now called her own, reflecting on everything that had transpired since that first knock upon her family's door. She thought of her father, safe now from the debt that had threatened to destroy them. She thought of Tomas, free to continue his education without fear of losing their home. And she thought of the man she had married, a puzzle wrapped in cold formality, hiding warmth and wounds she had only begun to glimpse. Whatever challenges lay ahead, She resolved to face them with the same courage that had carried her through every hardship before this one. She was no longer simply Alara Whitmore, desperate daughter pleading for mercy. She was now Duchess Ravenwood, mistress of a grand estate, and wife to a man whose secrets she suspected ran far deeper than either of them had yet acknowledged. The following morning brought the difficult farewell to her father and brother, their carriage disappearing down the long drive, while Alara stood watching until it vanished entirely from view. Turning back toward the manor, she caught sight of the Duke, observing her from a distant window, his expression unreadable as always, though something in his posture suggested he understood the weight of what she had just endured. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, before he stepped back from the window, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts, and the vast, unfamiliar house that was now, for better or worse, her home. She squared her shoulders once more, reminding herself of every reason she had chosen this path, and walked back inside to begin learning the rhythms of a life she had never expected to live, determined to make something meaningful from an arrangement that had begun as nothing more than a desperate bargain to save the people she loved most. Weeks settled into a rhythm Alara had not expected to find so quickly, though the manor's vastness still overwhelmed her at times, its endless corridors and countless rooms, a stark contrast to the modest house she had grown up in. She learned the names of the household staff, from the elderly housekeeper Margaret to the younger maids who giggled quietly whenever she passed, clearly still adjusting to having a duchess so different from what they had perhaps expected. Alistair remained largely reserved during those early weeks, spending long hours in his study, attending to matters of the estate, though Alara noticed small changes in his behavior that suggested he was, in his own guarded way, trying to make the arrangement work. He began joining her for dinner each evening, conversations stilted at first, but gradually growing more natural as they discovered small shared interests, a mutual appreciation for old books, an unexpected fondness for the gardens that stretched behind the manor. One afternoon, while walking through those very gardens, Alara discovered a section she had not yet explored, hidden behind a tall hedge that seemed deliberately overgrown, as though someone wished to discourage visitors. Curiosity pulled her forward, and she found herself standing before a small, neglected memorial garden, weeds threatening to overtake stone benches that had clearly once been carefully tended. A single marble statue stood at its center, depicting a young woman with delicate features, her expression frozen in gentle serenity. Alara approached slowly, studying the statue's face, struck by a strange sense of familiarity, before she realized where she had seen those features before. The portrait in the hallway that Alistair always avoided looking at directly. "You should not be here." Alara turned quickly, to find Alistair standing at the garden's entrance, his expression tighter than she had seen it since their wedding day, something raw and pained flickering beneath his usual composure. "I am sorry," she said immediately, stepping away from the statue. "I did not mean to intrude. I was simply exploring the grounds, and found this garden by accident." "It is not your fault," Alistair said, though his voice remained strained. "I should have mentioned it, so you would know to avoid this particular section." "Who was she?" Alara asked gently, sensing that avoiding the question entirely would only deepen the distance between them, though she worried the question itself might push him further away. Alistair was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the statue rather than on Alara, as though seeing something in its stone features that she could not perceive. "Her name was Isabel," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were engaged, many years ago, before circumstances took her from this world far too soon." "I am so sorry," Alara said softly, moving closer, though she stopped short of touching him, unsure whether comfort would be welcomed or resented in this moment of unexpected vulnerability. "It was a long time ago," Alistair said, though the pain in his voice suggested the wound remained far from healed. "She fell ill suddenly, and despite every physician I brought to her side, nothing could save her. I promised myself afterward that I would never again allow myself to care for anyone so deeply, knowing how easily such affection could be stripped away." Alara absorbed his words carefully, understanding suddenly the source of the coldness that had defined his reputation for so long, the walls he had built not from cruelty, but from grief, too heavy to bear twice. "That is why you offered marriage, as a practical arrangement," she said quietly, "rather than seeking love, as most men in your position might." Love makes a man vulnerable, Alistair said, finally turning to meet her gaze directly. I have already experienced the devastation that vulnerability can bring. I did not wish to invite that possibility again, not when practicality could achieve the same necessary outcome, without risking my heart a second time. And yet here we are, Ilara said gently, standing in a garden dedicated to a memory you have never fully released, having a conversation far more honest than either of us likely intended when this arrangement began. Alistair studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his guarded eyes, as though her words had touched something he had not expected to feel again. You are perceptive, he said finally, more perceptive than I anticipated when I first proposed this arrangement. I have had to be, Ilara replied. Survival requires careful observation, and my family's circumstances have taught me to read people carefully, searching for truth beneath whatever mask they choose to present. And what have you observed about me? Alistair asked, curiosity overtaking his usual reserve. Ilara considered her answer carefully before speaking. I have observed a man who hides genuine kindness behind cold formality. Perhaps out of fear that kindness invites pain, he is not prepared to endure again. I have observed someone who cares deeply for the people around him, even while insisting he wishes to avoid such attachments entirely. Alistair's expression softened slightly, something almost vulnerable crossing his features before he composed himself once more. You see more than most people bother to look for, he said quietly. Isabel used to say something similar, that I hid my true nature behind formality, afraid that showing warmth would somehow diminish my authority. Perhaps she understood you well, Ilara said. Perhaps that understanding is part of why her loss affected you so profoundly. Perhaps, Alistair agreed, though he offered nothing further on the subject. Instead, gesturing toward the garden's overgrown paths. This garden has been neglected for years. I could never bring myself to either restore it properly or have it removed entirely. Would you object if I tended it? Ilara asked, the question surprising even herself as it left her lips. Not to erase her memory, but simply to honor it properly, rather than allowing neglect to suggest indifference towards someone who clearly meant so much to you. Alistair considered her offer for a long moment, emotions crossing his face too quickly for Ilara to fully interpret. I would not object, he said finally. In fact, I believe Isabel would have appreciated such care, rather than the neglect I have allowed through my own inability to face this place directly. From that day forward, Ilara began spending quiet afternoons in the memorial garden, carefully clearing weeds and restoring the paths without disturbing the statue or the peaceful atmosphere the space had clearly once possessed. She did not discuss the work extensively with Alistair, sensing that he needed time to process her involvement in a space so tied to his deepest grief. Though she noticed him watching from a distance occasionally, his expression thoughtful rather than distressed. Their conversations grew more frequent during this period, extending beyond mere pleasantries into genuine discussions about their respective pasts, their hopes for the estate's future, and gradually, tentatively, their hopes for whatever their marriage might yet become. Ilara found herself looking forward to their evening dinners, no longer dreading the silence that had once filled those hours, but rather anticipating the moments when Alistair's guarded exterior would soften enough to reveal glimpses of genuine warmth beneath. One evening, as autumn began settling over the estate and the gardens outside took on golden hues, Alistair surprised her by requesting her opinion on a matter of estate management, something he had previously handled entirely on his own without consultation. The tenant farmers have requested additional support for the coming harvest season, he explained over dinner, sliding a ledger across the table toward her. I would value your perspective, given your family's own experience with financial hardship. Perhaps you can identify needs I have overlooked, having never experienced such struggles directly myself. Ilara studied the ledger carefully, offering thoughtful suggestions based on her own understanding of what struggling families truly needed: practical support rather than mere charity, opportunities to maintain dignity even while receiving assistance. Alistair listened attentively, incorporating her suggestions into his eventual decisions, treating her insights with a respect that surprised and pleased her in equal measure. Their partnership, born from necessity, was slowly transforming into something neither had anticipated when their arrangement first began. Ilara found herself no longer simply tolerating her circumstances, but genuinely valuing the quiet companionship growing between them, while Alistair, though still guarded in many respects, seemed to relax further into her presence with each passing week. Yet even as their bond deepened, Alara remained aware of the careful boundaries Alistair maintained. The moments when he would catch himself smiling too freely and quickly compose his expression once more, as though reminding himself of promises made to protect his own heart from further devastation. She understood his caution, even as she began to hope, quietly and privately, that perhaps their arrangement might eventually grow into something neither of them had dared to expect when desperation first brought them together. The memorial garden, meanwhile, slowly transformed under her careful attention, weeds giving way to blooming flowers, overgrown paths becoming clear and inviting once more. She often wondered, while working quietly among Isabel's memorial, whether she was honoring the woman's memory appropriately, or whether some part of her actually hoped that restoring this sacred space might also help restore something within Alistair himself, something long buried beneath grief and self-imposed isolation. Whatever the outcome, Alara remained committed to her path, determined to build genuine partnership from an arrangement that had begun as pure necessity, refusing to let fear or uncertainty prevent her from discovering whatever possibilities might still await them both. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the estate grounds in a soft layer of white that transformed the once golden gardens into a quiet, glittering landscape. Alara had grown accustomed to the rhythms of her new life by then, though certain moments still caught her by surprise, small reminders that she had traveled a long way from the frightened girl who once knocked timidly upon this manor's grand doors. One such moment arrived on a particularly cold evening, when Alistair returned from a journey to a neighboring estate, his expression carrying a weight Alara had not seen since their earliest, most difficult conversations. She noticed it immediately as he entered the drawing room, his usual composed manner replaced by something tighter, more guarded. "Is everything well?" she asked, setting aside the book she had been reading by the fire. Alistair hesitated before answering, removing his heavy coat and settling into the chair opposite hers. "I encountered Lord Pemberton during my travels," he said finally. "An old associate, though calling him a friend would be generous. He has long resented my position and title, believing himself more deserving of both, due to some distant family connection that holds little legal weight." "And what did he want?" Alara asked, sensing there was more to the story than Alistair had yet revealed. "He asked pointed questions about our marriage," Alistair said, his jaw tightening slightly. "About the circumstances that brought it about your family's debt. I suspect he intends to use the information against us somehow, though I cannot yet determine his exact purpose." Alara felt a flicker of unease at his words, though she kept her expression steady. What could he possibly gain from spreading such information? "Our marriage, however unconventional its beginning, is entirely legal and proper." "Legal, yes," Alistair agreed. "But society thrives on scandal, and Pemberton has never been above manufacturing rumors to serve his own ambitions. I would not put it past him to twist the truth of our arrangement into something scandalous enough to damage our reputation, perhaps even question the legitimacy of our union, in hopes of claiming some advantage for himself." "Let him try," Alara said, her voice firm, despite the concern building within her. "We have done nothing wrong. Our marriage may have begun from necessity, but it is honest, and I refuse to feel shame for choices that saved my family from ruin." Alistair studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering across his features. "You possess remarkable strength," he said quietly. "I confess there was a time, not so long ago, when I would have handled such threats entirely alone, without seeking counsel or support from anyone, least of all a spouse I barely knew." "And now?" Alara asked, curious about the shift she sensed in his words. "Now I find myself grateful to have someone beside me who faces difficulty with such unwavering resolve," Alistair admitted, the confession seeming to cost him something, as though vulnerability still felt foreign, despite the months they had spent building trust between them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret, the elderly housekeeper, carrying a letter that had just arrived by urgent messenger. Alistair took it, his expression darkening further as he read its contents. "It is from Pemberton," he said grimly, passing the letter to Alara. "He requests a meeting within the week, claiming he possesses information that could, in his words, clarify certain irregularities surrounding our marriage." Alara read the letter carefully, noting its carefully veiled threats disguised beneath polite language. "He is attempting intimidation," she said, hoping fear will make us vulnerable to whatever demands he intends to present. Undoubtedly, Alistair agreed, though I confess uncertainty about what irregularities he could possibly claim to have discovered, given that our marriage followed every proper legal procedure. Perhaps his claims are entirely fabricated, Alara suggested, designed simply to create doubt and force concessions from us out of fear rather than genuine evidence. Perhaps, Alistair said, though worry remained evident in his tone. Regardless, we must prepare carefully for whatever meeting he proposes, ensuring we present a united front that leaves no room for his manipulations to succeed. Over the following days, Alara and Alistair worked closely together, reviewing every document related to their marriage, ensuring nothing had been overlooked or left vulnerable to misinterpretation. Their partnership during this period felt different from anything before, a genuine collaboration built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than the careful formality that had once defined their interactions. Late one evening, while reviewing papers together in Alistair's study, Alara noticed him watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. Something warmer than mere professional partnership seemed to require. "What troubles you?" she asked, setting aside the document she had been examining. "Nothing troubles me," Alistair said, though his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "I was simply reflecting on how different this evening feels from our earliest days together, when silence and formality dominated every interaction between us." "Things change," Alara said softly. "People change, given enough time and honest effort." "Yes," Alistair agreed, his voice carrying something almost wistful. "I find myself grateful for whatever circumstances brought about that change, difficult as our beginning may have been." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she said nothing further, unwilling to push too quickly against boundaries he had maintained so carefully since Isabel's death. Instead, she returned her attention to the documents before them, though she remained acutely aware of Alistair's presence beside her, closer now than strict necessity required. The night before their scheduled meeting with Pemberton, Alara found herself unable to sleep, worry over the confrontation ahead keeping rest firmly out of reach. She rose from her bed and made her way toward the Manor's library, hoping a book might distract her thoughts long enough to allow eventual sleep. She found Alistair already there, sitting before a low fire, a glass of untouched wine beside him, his expression distant and troubled. "You could not sleep either," she observed, settling into the chair beside his own. "No," Alistair admitted. "I confess concern not for myself, but for you. Pemberton is not a man who fights fairly, and I fear whatever he intends to present tomorrow may cause you distress, regardless of how baseless his claims ultimately prove to be." "I appreciate your concern," Alara said gently, "though I assure you I am stronger than perhaps I appear. I have faced far greater hardships than a bitter man's empty threats." Alistair turned to study her directly, something raw and unguarded crossing his features in the firelight's soft glow. "You continue to surprise me," he said quietly. "I expected, when we first married, that our arrangement would remain purely practical, a mutual convenience without complication. Yet I find myself increasingly aware of qualities within you that extend far beyond mere practicality." Alara's breath caught slightly at his words, sensing the vulnerability behind them, understanding how difficult such an admission must be for a man who had spent years protecting himself from precisely this kind of exposure. "What qualities do you mean?" she asked softly, needing to hear him articulate what she suspected he was beginning to feel. "Your courage," Alistair said, "your honesty, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would break lesser spirits. I find myself, against my own careful intentions, beginning to care for you in ways I promised myself I would never again risk feeling for anyone." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and significant, neither quite certain how to proceed from such an unexpected admission. Alara reached out slowly, placing her hand gently atop his own, feeling him tense briefly, before relaxing into her touch. "I feel something similar," she admitted quietly, "though I confess, I did not expect to find myself caring so deeply for a man I initially agreed to marry, purely out of desperate necessity." Alistair's fingers curled gently around her own, the simple gesture carrying weight far beyond its physical significance. "Perhaps necessity brought us together," he said softly, but something else entirely seems determined to keep us bound, regardless of whatever challenges Pemberton or anyone else attempts to place before us. They remained together by the fire long into the night, conversation flowing more freely than ever before, walls that had protected them both slowly beginning to lower, revealing genuine connection building steadily beneath circumstances that had once seemed purely transactional. Whatever confrontation awaited them the following day, Alara felt reassured, knowing she would not face it alone, but alongside a partner who, despite his own guarded history, seemed increasingly willing to let her into the protected spaces of his heart. Lord Pemberton arrived at Ravenwood Manor precisely at midday, his carriage far more ornate than his modest title truly warranted, an early sign of the arrogance Alara had come to expect based on Alistair's description of the man. He entered the study with an air of confidence that seemed entirely unwarranted, given the weakness of whatever position he intended to argue. "Alistair," Pemberton said with false warmth, settling into a chair without waiting for invitation, "and this must be your new Duchess. Charming, though I confess the circumstances of your union remain rather curious to society at large." "Speak plainly, Pemberton," Alistair said, his voice cold and controlled, betraying none of the warmth Alara had witnessed the previous evening. "You claim to possess information regarding irregularities in our marriage. I would like to hear precisely what you believe you know." Pemberton smiled thinly, retrieving papers from within his coat with deliberate slowness, clearly savoring the moment he believed would finally grant him leverage over a man he had long envied. "It has come to my attention," he began, "that your marriage was arranged rather suddenly, coinciding precisely with the cancellation of a significant debt owed by the lady's father. Some might call this a business transaction, rather than a genuine union, which raises questions about its legitimacy, under certain older statutes, regarding marriages of convenience." "There is no statute prohibiting marriages arranged for mutual benefit," Alistair said flatly. "Our union followed every proper legal procedure, witnessed and documented appropriately. Whatever circumstances brought us together hold no bearing on its legitimacy." "Perhaps not on paper," Pemberton conceded, though his smile remained smug. "But society cares little for legal technicalities when scandal proves more entertaining. I imagine your standing among your peers would suffer considerably should details of this arrangement become widely known, particularly embellished with certain creative additions I have taken the liberty of preparing." Alara felt anger rising within her at his obvious manipulation, though she forced herself to remain composed, sensing that emotional reaction was precisely what Pemberton hoped to provoke. "What exactly do you want, Lord Pemberton?" she asked directly, refusing to let him continue dancing around his true purpose. Pemberton's gaze shifted toward her, surprise flickering briefly across his features at her directness. "Straightforward, I see. Very well. I propose a modest settlement, transferred quietly, to ensure my continued discretion regarding the unusual circumstances of your marriage, a reasonable sum, given what it would cost you both in reputation, should the full story become public." "You are attempting extortion," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet now, all pretense of civility stripped away. "I should have you arrested for such a blatant threat." "Arrested for what?" Pemberton laughed, "speaking honestly about circumstances that are, after all, entirely true. I have simply offered you the courtesy of discretion, for an appropriate price. Refuse, and I cannot promise what stories might reach society's ears, stories that may grow considerably less flattering with each retelling." Alara stepped forward before Alistair could respond, her voice steady, despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Lord Pemberton, let me be entirely clear. Our marriage began under difficult circumstances, yes. My father faced debt, and this arrangement resolved that debt while providing benefit to us both. There is no shame in that truth, and no amount of embellishment on your part will convince me otherwise." "Bold words," Pemberton said, though something uncertain flickered across his expression at her unwavering confidence. "Not merely bold," Alara continued. "Honest. If you wish to spread rumors about our marriage, spread the truth. Tell society that a duke chose practicality and genuine partnership over empty tradition. Tell them a woman chose her family's survival over false pride. I suspect most reasonable people will find far less scandal in that truth than you hope to manufacture through lies. And if I embellish that truth considerably," Pemberton pressed, though his confidence had clearly wavered under her direct challenge. "Then you will be lying," Alistair said, stepping forward to stand beside Alara, presenting the united front they had discussed the previous evening. "And I will ensure every witness to this conversation, along with documented proof of your attempted extortion, becomes available to anyone who questions the true nature of your claims. You will find yourself facing far greater scandal than anything you could possibly manufacture against us." Pemberton's expression finally cracked under the weight of their combined resolve, uncertainty replacing his earlier smugness. "You would risk your own reputation to expose my attempts?" he asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "We risk nothing," Alara said firmly, "because we have done nothing wrong. You, however, risk everything, given that extortion carries far greater consequences than an honest marriage born from mutual necessity." Silence stretched between them, as Pemberton weighed his options, clearly recognizing that his plan had failed to achieve the intimidation he had hoped for. Finally, he rose from his chair, gathering his papers with considerably less confidence than he had displayed upon entering. "This is not finished," he said, though the threat carried little weight, given how thoroughly his position had crumbled. "I will find another way to expose the truth of your arrangement." "There is nothing to expose," Alistair said calmly. "We have already told you the truth. Whatever else you attempt to spread will simply reveal your own dishonesty to anyone who bothers to investigate properly." Pemberton left without further comment, his carriage departing the manor grounds with considerably less grandeur than his arrival had suggested. Once he was gone, Alara allowed herself to release the tension she had been holding throughout the confrontation, her hands trembling slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. "You were remarkable," Alistair said, turning to face her fully, admiration evident in his expression. "I have never seen anyone dismantle Pemberton's schemes so thoroughly. Certainly not through simple honesty alone." "Honesty is often the strongest defense," Alara replied, though she appreciated his praise more than she cared to admit. He expected fear and shame. "We gave him neither." "We," Alistair repeated softly, testing the word as though its implications carried weight beyond its simple meaning. "I find myself grateful for that word, grateful that I no longer face such challenges entirely alone." Alara met his gaze, warmth spreading through her chest at the genuine affection she saw reflected there, affection that had grown steadily since their earliest, most awkward interactions. "Neither of us should have to face such challenges alone," she said quietly. "That is, I believe, part of what genuine partnership means." Alistair reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with her own, in a gesture that felt entirely natural, despite how far removed it was from the careful formality that had once defined their relationship. "I believe I am beginning to understand that lesson," he said softly, "though I confess it has taken considerably longer than it perhaps should have." Their moment was interrupted by Margaret, who entered with tea and an expression of poorly concealed curiosity about how the confrontation had unfolded. Alara and Alistair separated slightly, though the warmth between them remained evident even as they resumed more formal postures for the housekeeper's benefit. "Lord Pemberton has departed, I take it," Margaret said, setting down the tea tray with practiced efficiency. "He has," Alistair confirmed, "and I suspect he will think twice before attempting such schemes against this household again." Margaret nodded approvingly before departing, leaving Alara and Alistair alone once more, though the interruption had shifted the atmosphere back toward something more comfortable, familiar. They settled into chairs near the fire, sharing tea in companionable silence, the earlier tension of the confrontation gradually fading into quiet relief. "Thank you," Alara said eventually, breaking the silence, "for standing beside me today, rather than handling the situation entirely on your own, as I suspect you might have done before our marriage." "Thank you," Alistair replied, "for showing me that facing difficulty alongside someone I trust proves far more effective than facing it in isolation, however much I once believed otherwise." As afternoon light shifted toward evening, casting long shadows across the study where they sat, Alara found herself reflecting on how thoroughly their relationship had transformed since that first, tense meeting so many months ago. What had begun as pure necessity had grown into genuine partnership, and now, she suspected, was slowly evolving into something that resembled true affection, perhaps even love, though neither of them had yet spoken that word aloud. Whatever challenges Pemberton or society at large might still attempt to place before them, Alara felt confident that she and Alistair would face them together, united by a bond that had proven far stronger than either of them had initially expected when circumstances first brought them into each other's lives. Despite the closeness that had grown between them, a quiet distance began settling over Alistair in the days following Pemberton's failed attempt at extortion, a distance Elara noticed but could not immediately explain. He remained polite, even attentive in practical matters, yet something had shifted. Some careful retreat behind walls she had believed were finally beginning to crumble. She first noticed it during dinner, 3 days after their confrontation with Pemberton, when Alistair answered her questions with brief, formal responses, rather than the easy conversation that had become their habit. She studied him carefully across the table, searching for some clue to explain the sudden change. "Have I done something to trouble you?" she finally asked, unable to bear the strange formality any longer. Alistair looked up, something flickering behind his eyes before he composed his expression into careful neutrality. "No," he said. "Nothing at all. I have simply been preoccupied with estate matters requiring my attention." Elara did not fully believe his explanation, sensing something deeper troubling him, though she chose not to press the matter that evening, hoping time might reveal whatever had caused this sudden retreat. Yet the following days brought no improvement, and if anything, Alistair seemed to withdraw further, spending increasing hours alone in his study, avoiding the shared moments that had become so precious to her. Finally, unable to bear the growing distance any longer, Elara sought him out one evening, finding him standing before the very portrait of Isabel that he had always avoided discussing directly. "Alistair," she said softly, approaching carefully, "please tell me what troubles you. I cannot help if you continue hiding behind silence." He turned to face her, and for the first time since their confrontation with Pemberton, she saw genuine anguish behind his carefully maintained composure. "I am afraid," he admitted quietly, the confession clearly costing him considerable effort. "I told you things, that evening before Pemberton's visit, that I had not intended to voice so openly. I spoke of caring for you, of feelings I promised myself I would never again risk experiencing. And that frightens you," Elara said gently, understanding beginning to dawn. "Terribly," Alistair admitted, "because the last time I allowed myself such vulnerability, I lost everything. Isabel's death nearly destroyed me, and I built these walls specifically to prevent ever experiencing such devastation again. Yet here I am, feeling myself drawn toward you despite every promise I made to protect my own heart from further ruin." Elara moved closer, understanding now the source of his sudden withdrawal, recognizing the fear that had prompted his retreat, rather than any genuine desire to distance himself from her. "Alistair," she said softly, "I cannot promise that loving someone eliminates the risk of loss. Life offers no such guarantees, regardless of how carefully we protect ourselves. But I can promise that hiding from genuine connection, out of fear alone, guarantees a different kind of loss, one perhaps more painful than any risk we might otherwise face together." "How can you be so certain?" Alistair asked, his voice carrying genuine uncertainty rather than his usual composed authority. "Because I have watched you these past months," Elara said. "I have seen glimpses of the man you truly are beneath your careful walls, a man capable of remarkable kindness, genuine partnership, and yes, I believe, genuine love. Isabel's memory deserves honor, certainly, but it should not become a prison that prevents you from experiencing life and connection ever again." Alistair studied her for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind his guarded expression, walls that had protected him for years, beginning to show genuine cracks. "You speak with such conviction," he said softly, "as though you have already decided what you feel for me, despite the uncertainty that still exists between us." "I have decided," Elara said, her own voice trembling slightly now, as she prepared to voice feelings she had kept carefully guarded until this moment. "I care for you, Alistair. Deeply. What began as necessity has become something I treasure, something I do not wish to lose to fear or hesitation on either of our parts." The confession hung between them, fragile yet significant, and for a long moment neither spoke, both absorbing the weight of feelings finally voiced openly, rather than left to fester in careful silence. Finally, Alistair stepped closer, reaching for her hand, with a tenderness that contradicted every cold rumor society had ever whispered about him. "I care for you as well," he said quietly, the words seeming to release something long held tightly within him. More than I believed possible, given everything I promised myself after Isabel's death. You have shown me that vulnerability, however frightening, need not always lead to devastation. Sometimes, perhaps, it leads instead to genuine happiness, however uncertain that possibility once seemed to me. Elara felt tears gathering in her eyes, relief and joy mingling together, as the distance that had grown between them finally began to dissolve. Then let us face whatever uncertainty remains together, she said softly. Rather than allowing fear to separate us from happiness, we have both, I believe, genuinely earned. Alistair drew her closer, and for the first time since their wedding, he embraced her fully, not out of formal necessity, but out of genuine affection that had grown steadily since their difficult beginning. Elara returned the embrace, feeling the walls between them finally crumbling entirely, replaced by something far more solid, genuine trust, genuine partnership, and yes, she believed, genuine love. I owe you an apology, Alistair said eventually, pulling back slightly to meet her gaze, for withdrawing these past days, when I should have trusted you enough to voice my fears openly, rather than retreating into silence. You are forgiven, Elara said simply. We are both still learning how to navigate feelings neither of us expected when this arrangement first began. Patience and honesty, I believe, will serve us far better than perfection. They stood together before Isabel's portrait for a long moment, and Elara sensed something shift in Alistair's posture as he studied the painted features that had haunted him for so long. I believe, he said softly, that Isabel would want me to find happiness again, rather than remaining trapped in grief indefinitely. Perhaps honoring her memory means allowing myself to love again, rather than closing my heart entirely out of fear. I believe that too, Elara said gently, squeezing his hand in quiet support. From that evening forward, something fundamental shifted between them. The careful formality that had once defined their marriage, giving way to genuine intimacy, built on honesty, rather than mere practical necessity. They spent increasing hours together, not simply managing estate affairs, but genuinely enjoying each other's company, sharing stories from their respective pasts, laughing together over small moments that might have once seemed insignificant, but now carried genuine warmth and connection. Elara continued tending the memorial garden, though now Alistair often joined her, sharing memories of Isabel, not with the guarded pain that had once accompanied such conversations, but with a gentler nostalgia that suggested genuine healing was finally taking place. The garden itself flourished under their combined attention, flowers blooming in colors that seemed to reflect the growing warmth between them. Yet even as their relationship deepened into genuine love, neither of them could have anticipated the challenge that still awaited them, one that would test not only their newfound affection, but their combined strength and resolve in ways far more dangerous than anything Pemberton's petty extortion attempts had ever threatened. Spring arrived at Ravenwood Manor with a gentleness that seemed to mirror the transformation taking place within its walls. The memorial garden Elara had restored now bursting with color, and the relationship between its master and mistress blooming just as vibrantly. Word of the couple's evident happiness had begun spreading through nearby estates, replacing the earlier scandal and speculation with genuine admiration for a marriage that had defied every expectation. Elara's father, fully recovered now from his illness, visited the manor that spring, bringing Tomas along to see his sister's new life firsthand. Watching Alistair interact warmly with her family, offering Tomas advice about his studies, and treating her father with genuine respect rather than the cold distance she had once feared, filled Elara with quiet joy that continued growing with each passing day. You seem truly happy, her father observed one evening, as they walked together through the restored gardens, while Alistair and Tomas discussed university prospects nearby. I confess, I worried greatly when you first accepted this arrangement, fearing you had sacrificed your own happiness for our family's survival. I worried too, in the beginning, Elara admitted. But sometimes, father, the most unexpected arrangements yield the most genuine happiness. I did not simply save our family through this marriage. I found something I never expected to find, a partner who understands me completely, who values my strength rather than fearing it. Her father smiled, genuine relief evident in his expression. Then I could not have hoped for a better outcome, regardless of how unconventional the path that led us here. That evening, after her father and brother had retired for the night, Alara found Alistair waiting for her in the private garden, moonlight casting a silver glow across Isabel's memorial statue and the flowers surrounding it. He held something small in his hands, and as she approached, she recognized it as a delicate ring, far simpler than the grand jewels she had expected a duke might offer. "This was my mother's," Alistair explained, his voice carrying quiet emotion as he held the ring toward her. "I never offered you a proper ring when we married, given the circumstances that brought us together so quickly. I would like to offer it now, not as a symbol of the arrangement that began our marriage, but as a symbol of the genuine partnership and love that has grown between us since." Alara felt tears gathering as she extended her hand, allowing him to slip the ring gently onto her finger, the gesture carrying weight far beyond its physical significance. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything you have given me, far beyond what I ever expected when I first walked through your gates, seeking mercy for my father's debt." "You have given me far more," Alistair replied, drawing her close. "You gave me back my capacity to love, to trust, to hope for genuine happiness, rather than mere practical arrangement. I did not simply gain a wife through our marriage, Alara. I gained a partner who understands the deepest parts of my heart, wounds and all." They stood together beneath the moonlight, the memorial garden around them no longer a place of solitary grief, but a testament to healing and renewed hope. Alara rested her head against Alistair's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible, given how their marriage had begun. "I have been thinking," Alistair said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about our future together. About the possibility of children, of building a family that extends beyond the two of us alone." Alara pulled back slightly to meet his gaze, warmth spreading through her at the vulnerability evident in his expression. "I have thought of that as well," she admitted, "though I confess uncertainty about how you might feel, given everything you experienced with Isabel." "I want this," Alistair said firmly, his voice carrying genuine conviction rather than mere obligation. "I want a family with you, Alara. Children who will grow up knowing genuine love between their parents, rather than the cold formality I feared our marriage might otherwise have become." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, cementing plans for a future neither had anticipated when circumstances first forced them together. Over the following weeks, their bond continued deepening, small moments of genuine tenderness becoming the foundation of a marriage that had transformed entirely from its practical, transactional beginning. Yet even as happiness settled more firmly into their daily lives, subtle signs began emerging that suggested Pemberton had not fully abandoned his earlier schemes. Alistair received word from associates in the city that rumors, however vague and unsubstantiated, continued circulating about irregularities in their marriage, rumors that traced back, however indirectly, to conversations Pemberton had allegedly been having with various society figures. "He continues attempting to damage our reputation," Alistair said one evening, reading a letter from a trusted associate who had warned him about the persistent whispers. Though nothing concrete enough to constitute a legitimate threat, merely enough to keep uncertainty alive among those inclined toward gossip. "Should we be concerned?" Alara asked, though she felt less fear than she might have months earlier, confident now in the strength of their partnership and their shared ability to face whatever challenges arose. "Cautious, perhaps," Alistair said, "though I do not believe Pemberton possesses the resources or credibility to cause genuine damage at this point. We exposed his attempted extortion clearly enough that most reasonable people recognize his claims as mere bitterness rather than legitimate concern." Despite his reassurance, a subtle unease lingered beneath the surface of their otherwise happy existence. A quiet awareness that Pemberton's resentment remained unresolved, waiting perhaps for another opportunity to manifest in ways neither of them could yet anticipate. Alara pushed the concern aside as best she could, focusing instead on the genuine happiness that continued building within their marriage, though she could not entirely shake a nagging sense that their trials were not yet fully behind them. That summer brought further joy, when Alara discovered she was expecting their first child, news that filled Alistair with an emotion so profound that Alara witnessed him weep for the first time since she had known him. Tears not of grief this time, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude for the family they were building together. "I never believed I would experience such happiness again," Alistair admitted, holding her close as they absorbed the news together. "You have given me more than I ever thought possible, Elara. A second chance at love. And now, a family I feared I would never have the courage to build." Elara held him close, her own heart overflowing with emotion, as she considered how completely their lives had transformed since that first, desperate knock upon her family's door so many months ago. Whatever challenges still awaited them, whatever schemes Pemberton might yet attempt to unleash, she felt confident that their bond, built on genuine love and mutual respect, would prove strong enough to withstand any trial that fate placed before them. Little did she know, as she settled into the comfortable joy of impending motherhood, that Pemberton's resentment had not simply faded into harmless gossip, but had instead grown into something far more dangerous, a scheme that would soon test the very foundation of the happiness she and Alistair had worked so carefully to build together. The fire broke out in the early hours of an autumn morning, smoke curling from the manor's east wing, where the estate's official records were kept, waking the household with shouts of alarm and the acrid smell of burning paper drifting through the corridors. Elara, now visibly expecting and moving carefully due to her condition, was roused by Margaret's urgent knocking, her face pale with fear as she urged Elara toward safety.
"The record room is ablaze,"
Margaret said breathlessly.
"The staff are working to contain it, but his lordship fears many of the estate's important documents may be lost."
Elara made her way carefully downstairs, finding Alistair already directing servants as they formed a line to douse the flames with water drawn from the courtyard well. His expression, usually so composed, carried genuine alarm as he coordinated the effort, though he paused briefly upon seeing Elara approach. "You should not be near the smoke," he said urgently, guiding her toward the main hall, away from the worst of the commotion. "Please, for the child's sake, remain here, where the air is clear." "What of the records?" Elara asked, concern evident in her voice. "Alistair, our marriage documents. The papers proving my father's debt was properly forgiven. Were they kept in that room?" Alistair's expression tightened with the same worry that had begun forming in Elara's mind. "Some copies, yes," he admitted. "Though the original documents should remain safely filed with our family solicitor in the city, as is proper practice for matters of such legal significance." The fire was eventually contained, though not before considerable damage had been done to the record room and its contents. Several important estate documents reduced to ash beyond recovery. As dawn broke, and the exhausted household began assessing the damage, a disturbing detail emerged that transformed simple misfortune into something far more sinister. "There are signs the fire did not start naturally," the estate steward reported grimly, showing Alistair evidence of an accelerant discovered near the room's origin point. "Someone deliberately set this fire, my lord, and judging by which documents suffered the greatest damage, I suspect their intention was quite specific." Alistair's expression darkened considerably as understanding dawned. "Pemberton," he said, the name carrying the weight of certain knowledge, rather than mere suspicion. "This has his signature written all over it, however carefully he has attempted to disguise his involvement." That afternoon, a messenger arrived bearing news that confirmed their worst fears. A formal legal challenge had been filed in the city courts, questioning the validity of their marriage based on claims that the original debt cancellation papers had never been properly filed, suggesting instead that Elara's father's debt remained legally outstanding, and by extension, that their marriage rested upon fraudulent grounds. "This is precisely the scheme he has been building toward," Alistair said, reading the legal summons with barely contained anger. "He destroyed the copies here at the manor, hoping to create doubt about whether proper documentation ever existed, while simultaneously filing this challenge before we could produce the original papers from our solicitor." "Can he truly succeed with such a scheme?" Elara asked, fear for their family's future rising within her, despite her attempts to remain calm for the sake of her unborn child. "Only if the original documents cannot be produced in time," Alistair said grimly. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now, which means we must retrieve the original papers from our solicitor in the city and present them as evidence, proving beyond doubt that your father's debt was properly cancelled and our marriage rests on legitimate legal ground." "Then we must leave immediately," Elara said, determination overriding her physical discomfort. "There is no time to waste if the hearing proceeds in only 3 days." Alistair studied her carefully, clear concern for her condition warring with the urgent necessity of their situation. "The journey will be difficult, particularly given your condition. I could travel alone and retrieve the documents myself, allowing you to remain here safely." "No," Alara said firmly. "This challenge threatens not only our marriage, but my father's reputation, and everything we have built together. I will not remain behind while our future is decided without me. I am stronger than my condition might suggest, and I refuse to be sidelined during a crisis that affects us both equally." Recognizing the futility of arguing against her determination, Alistair agreed to bring her along, though he insisted on additional precautions for her comfort and safety during the demanding journey ahead. They departed within the hour, the carriage moving as quickly as safety allowed toward the distant city where their family solicitor maintained his offices and, hopefully, the crucial documents that would expose Pemberton's scheme entirely. The journey proved exhausting, made more difficult by autumn rains that turned roads muddy and travel considerably slower than they had hoped. Alara endured the discomfort with quiet determination, though Alistair watched her closely throughout, concern evident in every glance he cast her way during their difficult journey. They arrived in the city late on the second day, finding their solicitors' offices already closed for the evening, forcing them to wait until morning, despite the urgency pressing upon them. That night, staying at a modest inn near the solicitors' offices, Alara found herself unable to sleep, worry over the coming hearing, keeping rest firmly beyond reach. "We will succeed," Alistair said softly, noticing her restlessness as they lay together in the unfamiliar bed. "I refuse to allow Pemberton's petty resentment to destroy everything we have built, particularly not now, with our child's future also at stake." "I believe in us," Alara replied, taking comfort in his steady presence beside her. "Whatever challenges Pemberton has constructed, we have faced worse together, and emerged stronger for it." Morning arrived with fresh urgency, and they hurried to their solicitors' offices as soon as they opened, explaining the dire circumstances that had brought them to the city with such haste. Their solicitor, a careful and meticulous man named Edwin Harcourt, listened with growing concern before retrieving the relevant files from his secure archives. "The original documents remain entirely intact," he confirmed, relief evident in Alistair's expression, as Harcourt produced the papers proving the debt's proper cancellation, complete with official seals and witness signatures that could not be disputed. "Whoever attempted to destroy evidence at your estate clearly did not anticipate that proper legal practice would ensure duplicate originals remained safely secured elsewhere." "Thank goodness for your thoroughness," Alara said, relief flooding through her at the sight of documents that would finally silence Pemberton's malicious scheme entirely. With the crucial papers secured, they prepared for the hearing scheduled the following morning, Harcourt agreeing to accompany them and present the evidence formally before the court. That evening, as they reviewed strategy for the hearing, a final piece of concerning news arrived. Pemberton himself had been seen in the city, along with associates whose reputation suggested willingness to engage in tactics considerably less civil than mere legal maneuvering. "We must remain vigilant," Alistair warned, genuine concern evident in his expression, as he considered the implications of Pemberton's continued presence and unknown intentions. A man desperate enough to commit fraud and arson may prove capable of further desperate measures should his scheme continue collapsing before him. Alara felt a chill of genuine fear at his words, understanding now that their confrontation with Pemberton's ambitions had escalated far beyond simple legal disputes into something considerably more dangerous, a realization that would prove all too accurate as the hearing's dramatic conclusion approached. The courthouse was crowded that morning, word of the unusual case having spread quickly through the city's social circles, curiosity drawing spectators eager to witness the outcome of a dispute involving a duke's marriage and questions of fraudulent debt. Alara sat beside Alistair at the front of the chamber, her hand resting protectively over her expecting belly, while Harcourt organized the documents that would prove essential to their defense. Pemberton arrived shortly before proceedings began, his expression carrying a confidence that Alara suspected was carefully constructed to mask genuine uncertainty about how thoroughly his scheme had already begun unraveling. He offered a slight, mocking bow toward Alistair before taking his seat among the small group of associates who had accompanied him. The magistrate called the proceedings to order, and Pemberton's solicitor rose first, presenting the fraudulent claim with practiced eloquence, suggesting that the original debt cancellation had never been properly documented, and that the fire at Ravenwood Manor had conveniently destroyed evidence that might have otherwise supported the Duke's position. A curious coincidence, the solicitor argued, that such crucial documentation would be lost precisely when questions arose regarding its validity. Alistair's jaw tightened at the implication, though he remained composed, waiting for Harcourt's opportunity to present their defense. When that moment finally arrived, Harcourt rose with quiet confidence, producing the original documents that Pemberton had clearly believed no longer existed. "Your Honor," Harcourt began, "I present the original debt cancellation papers, properly filed and witnessed at the time of the marriage between the Duke of Ravenwood and Lady Alara Whitmore, now Duchess Ravenwood. These documents have remained securely archived in my offices since that time, entirely unaffected by the unfortunate fire that occurred at the estate." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Harcourt presented the papers for the magistrate's examination, their authenticity immediately evident through official seals and signatures that could not be disputed. Pemberton's expression shifted rapidly from confidence to visible alarm as his scheme began collapsing before the assembled crowd. "Furthermore," Harcourt continued, "I must bring to the court's attention evidence suggesting the fire at Ravenwood Manor was not accidental, but deliberately set, with accelerants discovered near the origin point, precisely where copies of these very documents were kept. I have witnesses prepared to testify regarding Lord Pemberton's suspicious presence near the estate shortly before the fire occurred." The courtroom erupted into astonished whispers as the true nature of the scheme became clear to everyone present. Pemberton rose abruptly, his composure entirely shattered now. "This is preposterous," he sputtered. "I had nothing to do with any fire. This is merely an attempt to distract from legitimate questions about the marriage's validity. Legitimate questions that have now been thoroughly answered," the magistrate said sternly, examining the documents with careful scrutiny before setting them aside. "These papers clearly establish that the debt in question was properly and legally cancelled at the time of the marriage between the Duke and Duchess of Ravenwood. Any suggestion otherwise appears to be entirely without merit. Furthermore," the magistrate continued, turning a stern gaze toward Pemberton, "the evidence regarding the fire at Ravenwood Manor raises serious concerns that this court cannot simply overlook. I am ordering a formal investigation into Lord Pemberton's involvement in what appears to be a deliberate attempt to destroy legal evidence and defraud this court through false claims." Pemberton's face drained of color as the full weight of the magistrate's words settled over him. The scheme he had so carefully constructed collapsing entirely under the weight of evidence he had never anticipated surviving. Guards moved to escort him from the courtroom as formal charges were prepared, his associates quickly distancing themselves from a man whose reputation had just been irreparably destroyed. As the courtroom slowly emptied following the dramatic proceedings, Alara felt overwhelming relief wash through her, the tension of recent days finally releasing as she leaned against Alistair, who wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. "It is finished," Alistair said softly, relief evident in his own voice as he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Pemberton will face consequences for his actions, and our marriage stands validated beyond any doubt, exactly as it always was." "Thank goodness for Harcourt's thoroughness," Alara said, gratitude filling her voice, as she considered how differently the outcome might have unfolded had the original documents not survived so carefully protected. They returned to Ravenwood Manor within days, the journey home considerably lighter in spirit than their urgent journey to the city had been. The household staff welcomed them with genuine relief, having worried considerably during their absence, and Margaret embraced Alara warmly, despite the informality such a gesture typically represented. "We heard news of the hearing's outcome," Margaret said, tears of relief evident in her eyes. "Thank goodness justice prevailed, and that dreadful man's schemes have finally been exposed for what they truly were." The following months passed in peaceful contentment, the estate gradually recovering from the fire's damage, while Alara's pregnancy progressed toward its final stages. Alistair remained constantly attentive, his earlier guarded nature having transformed entirely into open affection and genuine partnership that extended into every aspect of their shared life together. When their daughter was finally born on a crisp winter morning, Alara watched Alistair hold their child for the first time, tears of pure joy streaming down his face as he gazed upon the small life they had created together. "She is perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he cradled their daughter gently. "Perfect, just like her mother." "We shall name her Isabel," Elara said softly, watching Alistair's expression shift with surprise and profound gratitude at her suggestion. "Not to replace the memory you carry, but to honor it, and to ensure that the love which brought healing into your life continues forward through our daughter." Alistair looked up at her, overwhelming emotion evident in his tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, Elara. For saving my heart from the isolation I once believed I deserved. For giving me a family I never thought possible. And now for honoring Isabel's memory in a way that feels like genuine healing rather than mere obligation." As their small family settled into the joy of new parenthood, the estate around them continued flourishing. The memorial garden Elara had first restored, now representing not merely a place of quiet remembrance, but a symbol of the profound transformation that had taken place within Ravenwood Manor itself. What had begun as a desperate arrangement born from debt and necessity had blossomed into a marriage built on genuine love, unwavering partnership, and mutual respect that neither Elara nor Alistair could have possibly anticipated when circumstances first brought them together. Years later, society would still speak occasionally of the unusual beginning to their marriage, the story of a young woman sent to beg forgiveness for her father's debts, only to receive an unexpected proposal from a duke whose cold reputation had masked a heart capable of profound love. Yet those who knew Elara and Alistair personally understood the deeper truth behind their story, that genuine love often arrives not through grand romantic gestures or carefully planned courtship, but through shared adversity, mutual respect, and the courage to remain open to unexpected happiness, however improbable its origins might initially seem. Elara often reflected, while watching her husband play gently with their growing daughter in the very gardens where their love had first taken root, that fate had guided her toward exactly the life she was meant to live, even through circumstances that had once seemed like nothing more than desperate necessity. What began as an obligation to save her family had become the greatest gift she had ever received. A partner who cherished her completely, a family built on genuine devotion, and a love story that proved even the most unlikely beginnings could blossom into the truest and most enduring happiness imaginable.